I'm Lisa.
And I'm Suzy, and this is the Coaching Cast. We are the No Nonsense podcast, chatting about the things impacting you at work right now, helping you to survive and thrive in today's workplace.
We discuss different topics each episode, sharing our ideas, hints, and top tips from our experiences of working in the corporate world, running our own businesses, and also being qualified coaches. We also try to have a few laughs along the way too, because taking yourself too seriously is just boring. We really hope you enjoy listening. In today's episode, we are diving into a topic crucial in the business world, yet so often overlooked: the importance of language. We will explore why language matters so much in business, how it impacts relationships and outcomes, and some practical tips on refining your communication for better results. So stay with us and enjoy. So before we dive into this hot topic all about language and the power of language, I'm really excited about talking about this today, Suze. It's such a good one. Tell me, how have you been for the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. So yeah, we've got a brand new chapter starting in my household in a couple of weeks, because Arthur starts school.
Oh, bless him.
I know, and I don't know how I feel about it, if I'm completely honest. Yeah, bit of a roller coaster of emotions for me. He's totally cool. He's fine. He's ready. He's like, yeah, come on, let's crack on. No issues there. I am the issue in this situation. All about me. But yeah, big change. And it's kind of like a change that I knew was coming, but my emotion around it, I wasn't expecting, if I'm completely honest. I think because Arthur's my one and only, I'm not doing this again. And so it feels very much like an ending, which we've talked about endings actually on numerous times on this podcast. And yeah, it feels like an ending and an exciting new beginning as well. But for me personally, I will be a bit sad when he finishes nursery for the last time and we kind of walk away, because it's been a brilliant setting for him to set him up and get him started in life. And also I have had the privilege to look at, like, have him every Friday. So my working week is going to change now. So I'm going to full time. If anybody wants any coaching or sales support, I'm going full time.
Quick, grab her, people. She's around full time. Yeah,
I've got capacity. So yeah, all a bit of a change. So I'm feeling just a little bit unsettled, if I'm completely honest with you.
I think that's so normal. I can't believe he's starting school. Like, before this episode, and you and I were just having our quick catch up, our vocal warm up, if you will. Yeah, talking about him starting school, because I was working with you when you were pregnant before you went on maternity leave. So I remember him being in your belly. I remember him being born. I can't believe he's starting school now. That makes me feel so old as well, and also a bit like, where the hell are these years gone? What have I been doing? God, you're going full time in work, but you're now going to be full time parent of a child at school. So you're going to get involved in all the school activities, aren't you? Are you joining the PTA, or are you
no,
refraining?
No. I'm already on like a PTA for preschool, which I'm like, no, I'll do that. Like, I'm still helping there, but I'm not doing this. But my friend Chloe will laugh, because if she listens to this, because she'll be like, give her 3 months, she'll be on the PTA.
Do you know, I'm sorry, I was just about to say the same thing. I agree with your friend Chloe. We're having this conversation now, like, it's episode 91. We need to take this down. This is being recorded. Suzy's bound to be like running the PTA by Christmas, and
can't help myself.
It'll all be stories about the latest crisis/gossip that's hit the PTA. You'll be knee deep in organising fates and school discos.
Commercial opportunities.
Exactly.
Basically.
I can see it now.
Yeah,
I can see it
now.
I'm looking forward to it already. But yes, hey, yeah, this is gonna be a whole new chapter of stories to bring to the podcast. Arthur's adventures at school and the joys of being a parent at the gate. I hear enough as it is from my mates about the general standing at the gate and what goes on. That's like a whole nother habitat culture right there.
Okay.
Interesting times. But yeah, so to all you CBBS out there who've got children either returning to school, changing schools, going back to school, I hope you've survived the summer holidays.
Yeah.
I hope you got through it successfully, one piece. And yeah, wishing everyone all the best for this new school year that's starting for everyone who that's relevant to, at whatever stage, and hoping that goes well. So yeah, I mean, in stark comparison, I've just been traveling and enjoying myself. So before we lose a load of listeners because of that smug bombshell moment of being footloose and fancy free and just traveling around,
living her best Judith Chalmers life again. It
exactly.
kind of dropped off for a bit, and now it's back in full vengeance, I'd say.
Yeah, I love the fact you've referenced Judith Chalmers, because my mates were talking about Judith Chalmers' resurgence, because I was traveling around. I visited Istanbul with my dad and had a jolly time, the two of us, celebrating my 40th. It was wonderful. The Terry's on tour. Robin and I had a wonderful time. And then meeting up with my mates in Puglia to finish off the adventure. It was incredible. So yeah, Judith out in full force, but now back on African soil, where I now reside, and yeah, refreshed and ready to go. So yeah, so shall we get stuck into this topic then? Language. I'm excited about this one. This was a good one actually to return to, I have to admit. I've got the irony, got a lot to say about this topic on language. So. Right.
Right, let's go.
Let's go. Language isn't just about the words we use. It's the foundation of how we connect, how we build trust, how we negotiate, and ultimately how we lead others and ourselves. Whether you're sending an email, crafting a marketing message, or having a face-to-face conversation, the language you choose shapes perception and success. In business, every word we use sends a message, not just in its literal meaning, but also in the tone, context, and subtext. For example, the difference between saying we should and we must might seem small, but it carries different levels of urgency and authority. In business, language is more than just a communication tool. It's a strategy. Suze, big subject. Why does this topic matter so much in business, do you think?
This is a huge topic, and there's loads of different strands to this. So when I was thinking about this today, I was kind of like, oh gosh, there's so much I want to kind of say about language in business. I suppose for me and my experience of it, I do a lot of work in sales. My corporate career has been in sales. So language is really, really critical when building relationships with clients, when building proposals, when influencing, when negotiating, etc., etc. And one of the things I always remember about language in that context is something that got taught to me probably like 15 years ago now on a training course, which was about what they classified at the time as weak speak. Okay. So you kind of referenced it in the intro there, but those kind of words that we sometimes use, and I do this, by the way, where we kind of undermine our message because we add in like filler words, or we add in words which don't sound as kind of assertive as we would like. So probably being one of them, for example. Obviously. Yeah. I just did one there. That's a filler word. So just being another one. Just thought I'd send this over. I'm sending this over now. Like, so when you're trying to absolutely influence, build relationships, communicate, there's in people who do like content writing, for example, their whole job is about language and communicating a point or a service or a message in a certain way, in a certain tone. This is a huge topic. There's lots of different strands to it. And also then you've got the other side of the coin, which is actually about language. And what I mean by that is I've got one of my clients, Emma, she listens to this podcast. So now she's gonna be like, Suzy just mentioned me. She has a,
Hi, Emma.
her business is all about language because she has a translation business.
Yeah.
Okay. ECLS translations, if you want to look it up. And, you know, language is essentially her business. So it's about also that localization of language to specific cultures, specific countries. And that's the same, and that's applicable still in business as well. So yeah, I definitely think, and you touched upon it in the intro, that this topic really matters. And the reason why it really matters is because it's the foundation of a lot of things that run through business, relationships, influencing, like I said, connecting, communicating. It underpins everything in all aspects of work and business. So it's so, so important. And I think the other piece as well, actually, when I was thinking about this is, for example, if you work in customer service, you know, your interaction with somebody in that situation, a lot of the time, the success of how you feel coming away from like that interaction, if you're complaining, is about how that other person like deals and handles it with you. And if they use the wrong word or the wrong language, or the tone is a bit off, like it can like completely change everything for the good and the not so good. So in certain sectors as well, in business or functions or roles, language becomes even more critical in its importance, for example, like complaint handling or customer service. So yeah, massive topic this.
Yeah. I think also it's thinking about the way in which your own language impacts you as well. And that's something I talk about a lot with my clients, because I do so much work in the leadership and management space, and not just in terms of the skills of leading and managing others, but actually the skills of leading and managing yourself. Because for me, successful leadership starts with you. So if you can't manage yourself well, I don't truly believe you can manage anybody else. And actually, so much of this particular topic, I think, is relevant when we talk about how we are using language internally, and the language that we're using to shape our thoughts and then shape how we're externally communicating to other people. And that's a big part of what I work on individuals with when we're talking about looking at their confidence, their success in both work and in life, the relationships they have. Because actually, I think you do have to think about how language evolves within you, and then how you choose to transition that from being an internal thought, idea, phrase into an external one. Because actually all of our language that we're using is impacting us as well as those who we're speaking with. So I think that's really important too. I know it's something I learned a lot about when I studied my qualification in neurolinguistic programming. And this was years ago, but it's never left me, because I found the learning so impactful, and it really helped to enhance my coaching skills, because a lot of that was focused around how our thoughts and our view of the world is built and translated to others through language, and how as soon as you start making just even small adjustments to your language, it actually has a big impact in a positive way. It can do on how you think about things, and also how you're able to form connections and the right perceptions with other people. But it does take consciousness to do it, because for a lot of this, when I work with clients, they're not even aware of the language they're using.
Yeah.
So that can be things like I described actually in the introduction. It's interesting, the shoulds. But just the difference it makes when we say things like, I need to do this, or I should be doing this. As soon as you remove that and replace it with, I want to do this, or I will do this, it creates a whole different dynamic. It feels different within us, and we're much more likely to do the things that we say we want to do and we will do, than things we say we should do or will try to. It doesn't have the same assertion or commitment level.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I think that's the part I find incredibly interesting, because in neurolinguistic programming, the phrase or the saying is, the meaning of your communication is the response you get, which I think is fascinating. So I think it's trying to really be clear that actually how people respond to you is down to the impression you're making in the first place. So if you're being really careful and considered with how you choose to speak to people, both in the language you choose, the tone, your body language, then actually you're putting yourself in the strongest position possible to get the response that you want. Whereas if you don't take into consideration those things and really carefully manage them, the response you get is essentially how other people have interpreted what you've done. And if you've been lazy about that, you're going to get a very different response. Because you said weak speak. I think of it as lazy language. And I talk about lazy language and feedback all the time. When people talk to me about the feedback they've received and they'll tell me what they were told, I'm like, oh, it's just lazy. Lazy language. When we haven't really thought carefully about how is this going to impact the person, I'm going to say this. Because we can be, it's like,
and it has impact on people. Like, people then create beliefs about themselves through the language that you use. I had that, right? So when I was in my corporate career, I remember a leader once said to me, I like you're backing yourself. Okay.
mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, why wouldn't I back myself? Like, what? And just by that sentence, like, I like you're backing yourself, I was like, why wouldn't I back myself? Like, and so that created a belief in me that I thought that I shouldn't back myself, because she didn't think that either, like that was the case. Like, so I like that you're doing that. It just inferred to me that she didn't think that that was something I should be doing. Now that's my interpretation, okay, that sentence, but that had a massive impact on me in terms of my self-confidence and my self-belief that I was enough. And that's kind of what we're talking about here, is like just being mindful of the language, the words you choose to use and how you construct them, because they can have impact in the moment, but also for a really long time as well on how people view themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I mentioned feedback because I think that is such a I think that's where this is really key. I think it is very much around being clear about, in terms of saying what you truly mean and being clear about what the intention is that you have for saying it.
Yeah.
Because I think intention is crucial in this. Because I think if our intentions, if we're clear in our intentions when we're saying something, that will inform what we say and how we say it. And I think when it comes to, for me, when it comes to feedback, but I think this is true in business, if we're clear that the intention behind what we're saying is for things to be even better, to support another to be better, to do good, not to be, I think, like, not to make a point to be competitive or to be cruel or to bring somebody else down. I think if our intentions have noble outcomes, I suppose, I think that does reflect therefore in what we say and how we say it. And I think that's really important. So, I think about this in feedback when it comes to if something's gone wrong, especially saying to someone, why did you do that for? Sounds very different to help me to understand the decision you made in that moment. Because why did you do that sounds accusatory. It immediately, any question really with a why, I think often causes people to
stay
feel
away
like,
from.
I think generally feels like the person has got to defend and justify. So none of us particularly like being put in that position, because immediately we go to protect ourselves. So we're much more likely to be heightened and be less open. And I think it's just thinking about, what is the outcome I want to achieve here, and how can I achieve that in the best way possible? But as I said, that is consciousness, that takes conscious effort. But I think it's always thinking about those things. I think that's why it's so important always to remember, how can I help myself to respond and not react? So that actually I can present myself in the best way possible. I can get what I need from this situation in the best way possible. I can help that person in the best way possible. So that actually what we're trying to achieve always is a mature adult to adult conversation that enables all of us to move on and progress from this.
Absolutely. It's interesting as well, like for me, I also think the word but, so like you might say, I don't know, like, yes, but okay. So what you're doing by saying but is saying, well, I heard you, but actually I'm not gonna kind of accept or acknowledge what you just said. I'm still right because I'm gonna go on and say my bit.
Yeah.
And my great friend Anderson does a lot of work on this. He does a lot of sales work, and he talks about this a lot, is that again in that influencing process, in building relationships, in building trust, building rapport, getting then to a point of saying yes on something, if you then just go but you just in that moment you just completely disregard what that person's already said. So they might have objections, they might have questions, they might have challenges, you acknowledge them and explore them, and then say okay, and look at an alternative. So it's interesting how like literally you, until you become aware of it and you start thinking, oh yeah, if I do say that, of course that's going to be the reaction of somebody. You become more intentional because you become more aware of the language that you're using. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is so powerful.
Yeah, it's so different. But yeah, you're right, but it's so dismissive. Yeah, but
I said that really northern then, didn't I? But
yeah, but yeah, it's so dismissive. That's the problem with but. And also, you see, this is where I'm saying about laziness, because we get into habits of speaking. So yeah, but becomes a word. Yeah, but rather than yes and. But it's the awareness, like you said, because we get lazy. So like yeah, but obviously, they all become part of our habit of language. I think when I worked at British Gas, I think it was British Gas, and I think it was obviously we, as an organization, culturally in the offices that I worked in, people got into the habit of prefacing or using obviously as a gap word. And it was like contagious. That was the problem, because I think language can become contagious in spaces if you're with each other all the time.
Oh yeah, 100%. That's where bullshit bingos grow from.
Yeah, true. But it became a habit that everyone said, obviously. And when I remember doing my NLP course during that time, because it was did I do my NLP course? 2016, 2017, I think it was. I just became hyper aware of this kind of thing and realizing how many people, including myself, was using word obviously as a filler word. And I started pulling myself up on it and just going, like taking a breath as soon as it came into my head. And I do it now, I actually say, when I say obviously, I actually catch myself and go, sorry, there's nothing obvious about what I've just said or I'm about to say. So I don't know, I've just said that word. So ignore that, just disregard it.
Interesting.
So I will, if I allow my mouth to keep running, which is obviously a general challenge for me as it is, I actually, though, can pick up that I've done it and gone, sorry, I don't know, there's nothing obvious about what I've just said to you. You don't understand what I'm talking about. You've got no experience of it. So I don't know what I just said, obviously. But actually, when I noticed it in the workplace, I, like a pain in the arse, I'm sure everyone found this really irritating, I would pick people up on it and go, what's obvious about that? Why have you said obviously? And it was mainly just to raise awareness, to go, are you even aware you've said it? Because I think that's the other thing, is we say things without realizing even we've said it.
And also, I think we have like certain environments, to build off your point there, which sometimes can mean that we become more clumsy with language.
Yes, yeah.
What I mean about, I do this, right? If I'm feeling unconfident in a situation, or if somebody is being incredibly direct with me, like incredibly assertive, not very warm, not very friendly, I will just start over talking. I will just start using filler words. probably like, obviously, probably, just, I'll go, does that make sense? Of course it freaking makes sense, Suzy. Like, you've just articulated, and I can see myself, I just cannot stop, because that environment or that situation or that person is making me feel uncomfortable and unconfident. And so then something inside me starts wanting to prove myself, but I do it in completely the wrong way, in the sense that I then start using lots and lots and lots of language, which is mainly filler language. So it's not assertive, strong language in the moment. And then I just probably undermine my message anyway.
Yeah, and I think we can all be guilty of that. I think anyone listening to this can totally relate. Some of us will go more introverted and go quiet and say less. Some of us will be triggered to over-explain, overcompensate, which is what I do. So when I'm nervous, I talk more and I make my point repeatedly. I can't. So even in a sentence, I have a tendency to say the same thing nearly 2 or 3 times, just in slightly different ways.
Okay.
Because I'm trying to engage the room and get their support. And if no one's giving me anything in response or acknowledgement, I'll say it like multiple times, which I'm really aware of. It's difficult to catch and stop in the moment, but I know I'm doing it. It's interesting what you said there, though, about does that make sense? So some people would say it's a great way to get buy-in. So on a positive, like as a flip side, because the presupposition is that it does. And when you ask people, does that make sense? It infers that there's either a yes or no answer, and most people will say yes because they don't feel comfortable to say no, even if it doesn't. So
exactly,
some people would say that's a good technique. Like I feel like we've been talking a bit around this already, but let's specifically look at this. So in the context of leadership, as I said, I feel like we've touched on this, but maybe let's go even more specific. How do you see language, and I suppose what we've been talking about, influencing the culture and relationships within teams?
Well, I think there's a really simple example here, just to kind of elevate our conversation a bit further, which is around, for me, inclusive language. When, interacting with teams, leading teams, building culture, whatever it might be. The difference between saying like, I don't know, we can figure this out, versus, I can figure this out, for example, or you can figure this out, is quite solid in terms of what that difference is and how that makes you feel, I suppose, is my point. And thinking about when it is the right context to use that inclusive language and when it isn't, because equally there are times in leadership when it's still appropriate to and needed to be more directive, and that's okay. That context is correct, and actually that's needed and required in order to move things forward. That's cool, that's fine. But I think thinking about where you nuance that inclusive language to get the right impact with what you're trying to achieve is really, really important. And I've got that wrong in my leadership career, definitely. So, I think there'd be times where I was up against it, probably from a performance perspective, and I can remember being like, you just need to do this. Rather than being like, we need to do this. What are the options? I went a bit more directive, which at that moment wasn't the right thing to do. Maybe later down the line it might have been, because we've talked about it already, but we hadn't kind of really discussed it, explored what the options were. I went like a bit too forceful straight off. And I remember talking to somebody who it just didn't resonate, that approach, that use of like, you just need to do this. They just shut off then, and we're like, nah. No, I'm not doing anymore.
No, it's a really honest reflection, Suze. So I can't think of anything specific, but I know for a fact I will have stuffed up, because I'm human. And in those moments where we're under pressure and the emotion is high, and us as leaders are not immune to that. Like, we carry so much of it all the time. We're not just carrying our performance, we're carrying the performance of the team, potentially the department, in terms of your seniority, potentially the business if you're an entrepreneur. So it's understandable that actually at times in those moments of high stress and strain, we stuff up with our language, we stuff up with our behavior. I think being aware of it and trying to help ourselves to be different is the key, and acknowledge when we make mistakes so we can do something better next time.
There's that quote, isn't there? It says people won't remember what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel.
Yeah, 100%. That's a great quote. And that's all related to this language piece for me. I'm sure I've used this experience multiple times. I might not be able to remember the time that I stuffed up specifically in this regard, but I know I have. But I definitely remember people who have managed me stuffing up with language. And I describe it as lazy language because they weren't specific. And I think that's the worst thing you can be in a leadership role. And so in the context of what we're talking about, how does language influence culture and relationships? If you're vague, I think it's one of the biggest problems as a leader and the worst impacts you can have, because I think you need to be clear so that individuals truly understand what you mean, and they understand therefore what they need to do. So if you're vague, you're holding up the team, you're holding up the individual, you're wasting their energy trying to work it out, figure it out. They'll go to the worst place possible. They'll never go to the positive, optimistic. And it's just so unhelpful and so inefficient. And that's definitely been my experience with leaders who've not got it right historically, where they've been lazy, they've said things flippantly. So, for example, I think one of the worst I've ever had is when I had feedback for a review, and it was along the lines of, people don't think you're doing a very good job. So and not being clear about it, and me not having the confidence or the assertion to actually challenge it and try and gain more information. I was really junior at the time, not long out of university. So I felt very intimidated by those who were more mature adults and in their careers than me. And I couldn't work with that. Who were people? People suggest many.
That infuriates me.
That could have been the whole organization at the time, because it was only a small company of 100 people. That could have been everybody for all I knew. Not doing a very good job. I didn't have any understanding as to what did that mean. Did that mean that I was doing the whole of my job incorrectly? So I had to sit with that for a couple of months and try and work through it, all through second guessing and what a waste of effort, energy and time. Not to mention the fact that how it dented my confidence. But that for me is lazy. I mean, that is quite extreme, to be fair. I've only had one awful experience like that. I think that was fairly isolated to the individual. But, as a leader, your responsibility is to be clear. I remember always the previous COO of Lucas Over Ibina, when you and I were there, Carol Robert. She said being clear is being kind, which is a quote taken from Brené Brown. And I couldn't agree more. And I think Carol believed that was the core role of being a leader. That actually that was your one major priority job, being clear for your people so that they fully understood what they needed to achieve, how that they could achieve that, how they could be better, where they were going wrong, what they could do differently. And I totally agree with that. I think that is one of the biggest roles that you have as a leader and the biggest influence you can have on a culture and a team. And that all comes down to your language. So, Suze, on this point then, what are your top tips for refining your language for even better results? What would you offer?
Okay, so we talked about a lot there. And we said at the start, this is a big topic. There's lots of different strands to this, and we've touched on a couple of those in more detail. For me, in my experience, I would say my top tip is number one, be clear and concise. So say no to lazy language. So to echo your point you just made.
Yeah. It's like look at that for seamlessness on the old linkage.
I know, anyone would think that this is a professional production. So yeah, say no to lazy language. Okay, that's my first top tip. Second, start becoming super aware of yourself and the language that you are using to yourself and with other people. Because once you become aware of what words you're using, like those filler words, or that weak speak, you can then make changes to reinforce the message you're trying to communicate with others. So that's my second tip.
Cool, love it.
Third tip, actually, is just play around with this. Just kind of be free and play around with it. Play around with the language. You'll get it wrong sometimes. This is not we're not saying you need to be perfect. This is not about perfection, because perfection doesn't exist. But this is about playing around and becoming more skillful and more intentional in your language. And like you said, if you can start to do that with yourself, you'll then start to pick it up with when other people are doing it. And you said about the obviously comment. You can then be like, why is that obvious? Or tell me more about that. You know, I did it the other day, just again to bring this point to life. I think I've talked about this on the podcast previously. My son was at nursery and like a fire engine came into the playground, and they were talking to the children about firemen. And he was coming, like, a fireman came, and I was like, no, it's a firefighter.
Oh yeah, you did tell me about this, yeah. And I think you did talk about the podcast, yeah.
But this is exactly the same thing. It's because in that moment, unconsciously, they were kind of influencing my son that firefighters are men. They're not. They're men and women, or, you know, lots of different aspects there. So yeah, it's like firefight. That's what I mean there. So just play around with it and just start getting super, super conscious.
Cool, love it. So I would build on yours with a couple of others. I think be brave, I think, and get feedback from others as to how you currently communicate. Get a better understanding right now as to what you're doing well and what could you do even better. And to understand from others how your current communication is landing, what impact you're having, and where therefore it would make sense and add value to make some tweaks and adjustments. I think that would be one. My other is, we haven't necessarily talked about this. We've talked about tone, we've talked about body language. All of that for me is about communication. It's like your non-verbal language. The one we didn't talk about was silence, actually, but I think it can be one of the most powerful tools when it comes to communication, is actually not saying anything at all. And really using silence to encourage others to speak and to hold space for others to feel able to speak and share. So I think that's probably one thing I would add. If you're someone like me who acknowledges that they talk a lot and possibly would even consider they talk too much, I tell you what, that has been one of the powerful lessons for me, is to say nothing and to use it as a way to invite other people to share with me and see what I learn and see how that changes the dynamic of our relationship. It's been quite a game changer for me, not just in my coaching career, but it was in my leadership career too.
Okay, I think we should do a whole episode on silence.
Oh yeah, the power of silence. Yeah, maybe we should. I'd be shockingly crap at it, so
we'll just be silent the whole episode.
Yeah. Just do a whole episode of nothing. Just like maybe like a challenge. Let's see if Lise can do a whole episode with saying nothing. That would be impossible. So yes, thank you so much for that, Suze. There's some great tips there. So we will collate these tips for you guys and we will share them at the end of the episode.
It's now time for Bullshit Bingo, where we call out phrases which get commonly used in the workplace, which, quite frankly, make us cringe. Our Bullshit Bingo for today's episode came from one of our CBBs, but I'll be honest, I can't remember where it came from. I think it might have been LinkedIn. And actually, it's an interesting one given the topic of what we've talked about today on the episode, because this is more of a word than it is a phrase. But today's Bullshit Bingo is granular.
Granular. Brilliant.
Thoughts?
So I tell you what, my first thought was, I've heard this so much, and then I couldn't remember the context of any of it. Because actually, I think it's the context it's used in that's quite funny, and that often makes me go,
But granular detail.
But isn't that just saying detail?
Yeah. Granular detail. Like have I used
Oh, come on. You and I have probably used majority of the bullshit bingos that we put in this podcast.
Maybe.
We're not immune to them. We know we've offended. We've definitely offended. But granular detail, is that not just saying detail?
Oh yeah.
Is it the same thing? Is granular the same thing as detail? Or I mean, I think of granular in the context of sugar, but that's
same.
that's
Granular coffee
granulated.
granules, like
granular. I'm gonna Google it. What does granular actually mean? Oh no, that's not saying detail. Resembling or consisting of small grains or particles. So actually that's quite funny if it's used in the context of anything we do in the workplace. Granular detail. Let's break this down into small particles or grains.
I love that.
Although it does say here in the Oxford Dictionary, characterized by a high level of granularity, a granular database. So I suppose it does work in the context of work. Yeah, including small details. So in other words, it's making your details even smaller in their details.
But it is making your details detailed.
Yeah, I think so. It is funny, but yeah, granular. Yeah, I mean, this has definitely been used. I'm sure we've used it.
Oh yeah, 100%. Good one. I like it. Right. Well, I'm sorry. As well. We need some more actually. So, CBeebies, do you have a bullshit bingo phrase or even singular word which you would like included in a future episode? Drop us a DM on Instagram, or you can message Lisa or myself on LinkedIn when and where you hear those corporate phrases that make you cringe. We need to hear them. Thank you.
We are coming to the end of today's episode where Suzy and I have been discussing the importance of language in business. And I would say not just in business, actually, in life. Because this topic around language, once you get into it, really makes you think about how you communicate in all aspects of your life. Trust me. Our top tips and recommendation from today's episode are, and we've got a few because it's that good. Number one, be clear and specific. Say no to lazy language. So really take the time to think about what you mean and therefore how you can translate that clearly and effectively in the language you choose. Remember, it's a choice. I think that's quite a big thing. Remembering that always that your language is a choice. Number two, become super aware. So this is something to start practicing now. Now, if we've been speaking about this topic, you found it interesting, it's piqued the interest somehow, start becoming more aware of language and the language you're specifically using, both in terms of how you're speaking to yourself and how you're speaking to other people, and start to think about how you can make small changes. A lot of what Suzy and I've talked about today is to do with small tweaks and adjustments. It's not major, it's small changes. Swapping out words, literally one or two here, can make such a major difference. And use that super awareness to start preparing better for conversations that you're going to be having, whether that be one-to-ones or negotiations or presentations, whatever it is. Use this topic to start helping you to prepare better and see what difference it makes to how you feel and the response you get. Number three, be more intentional. So that really links to what I've just said, because I think when you have that heightened awareness, you do your planning, you start being far more intentional in the differences that you choose to make. Number four, my offer was be brave. And if you really want to understand the impact of your language at the moment in your communication, get feedback from those that you trust to see how you're doing and where you could be even better. And use that insight to inform what you choose to do differently. And lastly is remembering that communication and language are influenced and enhanced, or possibly not enhanced, maybe taken away from, your tone, your body language, and also the use of silence. So we didn't talk a lot about silence today, but actually, if you're someone like me who finds they talk a huge amount, start practicing not saying a huge amount at all, especially with your team. Ask them a question and get them to tell you the answer, and just sit back and see what you learn, what you observe, and the difference it makes. So yeah, hold the space for others to speak. It's a big one. Some self-coaching questions to support you with this and to get you thinking differently are, number one, how do the words, phrases, or body language you use in business or work conversations influence the outcome of your interactions? So at the moment, how do they influence the outcome of your interactions? What are you noticing? What patterns emerge in your language that may empower, or the opposite, limit your effectiveness in work or business settings? And number three, knowing what you know, now you've answered those two questions, what could you do differently? Don't worry if you can't remember all these self-coaching questions or our top tips today, because there are quite a few, because that's how good this topic is. All of the tips and self-coaching questions will be on our Instagram page at The Coaching Cast at some point over the course of the next few weeks.
We will also have a new episode for you next month in early October. So get subscribing because you'll get a notification when that new episode is out. CBBs, we know you are busy, but it does mean the world to us if you could take a minute to rate, review, and subscribe the Coaching Cast wherever you listen. It takes seconds and it's free to do. Or even just tell one person in your life who you think this podcast might help. Pass it on, send them a link or a specific episode. It helps the podcast grow, and we are super, super appreciative.
We like to end each episode of the Coaching Cast with our personal song recommendation, giving you energy and motivation to launch you into the next part of your working day. It's my choice this week, and I've chosen quite an old one, and maybe not necessarily an obvious motivator, but I feel like it's quite anthemic, and I love it. And it is by Paolo Nutini, and it's called Iron Sky. And yeah, I stress the anthemic element of it. I just think it's a really powerful number. So yeah, go check it out if you don't know Paolo Nutini or revisiting his collection as I am currently. I think it's brilliant. So on that note, on that final song offering, we hope you've enjoyed today's episode. We're really grateful that you've been here with us. We hope you've enjoyed it as we have and have got things to take away. We will look forward to seeing you next month in October. So for now, we hope you have a good couple of weeks. And remember, CBBS, you've got this.